Have you ever met the human equivalent of a mosquito? Last weekend was our monthly family barbecue. These gatherings started after Dad's heart attack scare last year, a way to make sure we stayed connected as a family. Henry, 31M, my stepsister Rachel's, 28F husband, usually skipped these, claiming he had interviews, but this time he actually showed up. From the moment they arrived, I, 32M, could tell something was off. Rachel looked absolutely exhausted. Her nurse's uniform wrinkled like she'd just finished a shift. Henry trailed behind her, glued to his phone, barely acknowledging anyone's greetings. Throughout the afternoon, Henry parked himself in the corner of the patio, scrolling endlessly on his phone while Rachel helped Mom with the food prep and cleanup. I watched my sister move between the kitchen and the backyard, her shoulders tense, throwing anxious glances at Henry every few minutes. When she went inside to get more drinks, I followed her to check if she was okay. The moment we were alone in the kitchen, Rachel broke down. She slumped against the counter, tears streaming down her face as she told me everything. They were 3 months behind on rent. Henry had promised to find work, but she discovered he hadn't submitted a single job application in weeks. She was working double shifts at the hospital, sometimes 16 hours straight, and would come home to find dishes piled in the sink, laundry undone, and Henry passed out on the couch with his gaming headset still on. The worst part was that she'd been hiding all of this from everyone. She begged me not to tell our parents, especially Dad. She was worried the stress would affect his heart. She felt ashamed, like their failing marriage was somehow her fault. She kept saying if she could just work a few more shifts, pick up some overtime during the holidays, maybe they could catch up on their bills. Watching my strong, capable stepsister reduced to this broke something inside me. I knew a friend, Mike, who owned a successful construction company. He was always looking for reliable workers and paid well, starting at $25 an hour with full benefits after 90 days. They even provided training for people with no experience. I thought if I could just get Henry to consider it, maybe it could be a way out of this mess. I found Henry alone in the backyard, still glued to his phone. I tried to keep things casual at first, asking how the job search was going. He gave me his usual vague answers about having some promising leads and waiting to hear back from a few companies. When I mentioned Mike's company and the job opportunity, Henry's whole demeanor changed. His face twisted into this sneer I'd never seen before. He started ranting about how he wasn't going to lower himself to do manual labor like some uneducated person. Those were his exact words, like some uneducated person. The contempt in his voice made me very angry. I pointed out that honest work was better than no work at all, especially when his wife was working herself to exhaustion trying to support them both. That's when Henry completely lost it. He jumped up from his chair, getting right in my face, screaming about how I had no right to interfere in his life. He accused me of trying to humiliate him in front of the family, of always looking down on him because he hadn't gone to a fancy college like me. The fact that I attended community college and worked my way through school apparently didn't matter. Rachel came running out when she heard the shouting. I expected her to see how irrational Henry was being, but instead, she turned on me. She started screaming that I had no idea what they were going through, that Henry was trying his best, that I was just trying to make him feel worse about himself. It was like she'd completely forgotten our conversation in the kitchen just hours before. Henry stormed off to their car, and Rachel followed him in tears. The BBQ ended abruptly, with everyone standing around in shocked silence. My parents pulled me aside and laid into me about how I should have minded my own business. Did I really mess up here? Should I have kept my mouth shut and watched my sister continue to suffer in silence? I honestly don't know anymore. Mom said Henry was sensitive about his unemployment, that these things take time. Dad revealed that Rachel had told them Henry was working with a career coach and had some promising opportunities lined up. This was news to me and completely contradicted what Rachel had told me in the kitchen. I never had thought that a simple weekend family barbecue evening could turn my entire world upside down. 3 days have passed now as I write this post, and I still feel sick thinking about everything that happened. Before I proceed further into this post, let me give you some background on my relationship with my stepsister from the beginning. Rachel came into my life when our parents married. I was 12, and she was 8. My dad had practically raised me alone since my mom passed away when I was 5, and Rachel's mom had divorced her dad when Rachel was just a toddler. We bonded pretty quickly, probably because we both knew what it felt like to have pieces missing from our family puzzle. Growing up, we were inseparable. I was her protector, her confidant, and her best friend. She was also always there for me whenever I needed someone to talk to. 5 years ago, Rachel met Henry during her final year of nursing school. He was working in pharmaceutical sales at the time, making decent money, and seemed to have his life together. They dated for 6 months before getting married in a small ceremony. I remember having some doubts about how quickly they moved, but Rachel was so happy. Henry was charming, could make anyone laugh, and seemed to adore my sister. He would bring her lunch at school, help her study for her nursing exams, and even volunteered at the hospital events she organized. Our parents were thrilled that Rachel had found someone who appeared to be such a perfect match. The first year of their marriage went smoothly. Rachel graduated and started working as a nurse at the local hospital, while Henry continued his sales job. They bought a small condo, adopted a cat, and seemed to be living the newlywed dream. But things started unraveling about 2 years ago when Henry lost his job. He said the company was restructuring and his entire department was laid off. It seemed reasonable at the time. These things happen, and Henry had always been a hard worker. Rachel stepped up immediately, picking up extra shifts at the hospital to cover their expenses while Henry looked for work. She kept saying it was temporary, that Henry had great experience and would find something soon. But weeks turned into months, and Henry remained unemployed. His excuses got more elaborate. The job market was tough, his skill set was too specialized, the commute was too long, the pay wasn't good enough. Meanwhile, Rachel started working 60-hour weeks to keep them afloat. I began noticing changes in my sister about a year into Henry's unemployment. The spark in her eyes dimmed, she lost weight, and dark circles became permanent fixtures under her eyes. She stopped coming to our weekly family dinners, always having an excuse. She was covering someone's shift, or she was too tired, or Henry had a promising job interview the next day and needed her support. When she did come, she was quiet and withdrawn, nothing like the vibrant, laughing sister I grew up with. Through mutual friends, I started hearing concerning stories about Henry. While Rachel was pulling double shifts at the hospital, Henry was spending his days playing video games and his evenings at bars with his friends. He'd tell Rachel he was networking or had job interviews, but people saw him hanging out at the local pub in the middle of the day, buying rounds for everyone. One of Rachel's co-workers told me they saw Henry's car parked outside a casino multiple times during the week. I tried bringing up my concerns with our parents, but they always defended Henry. Mom would say he was probably just depressed about losing his job and needed time to find himself. Dad would remind me that the job market was tough and that we shouldn't judge someone when they're down. They kept insisting that Rachel would ask for help if she needed it, but I knew my sister. She'd always been fiercely independent, determined to handle her problems on her own. It was one of the things I admired most about her, but it was also what worried me. She'd run herself into the ground before admitting she needed help. All my fears came true 3 days ago after Rachel told me everything in the kitchen. But now, when I look at the aftermath, the fallout has been brutal. Rachel isn't speaking to me. She sent a long text saying I destroyed months of Henry's progress and demanding I apologize to him. She claims he was just about to turn things around before I interfered. My parents think I overstepped and should have kept my mouth shut. Even my wife, who usually supports my decisions, suggested I might have picked the wrong moment to confront Henry. But here's the thing. I keep thinking about Rachel's face in that kitchen, about her crying over past due notices and empty bank accounts, while her husband plays video games all day. Everyone's acting like I'm the bad guy for pointing out the obvious, that a grown man is perfectly content to let his wife work herself to death supporting him while he contributes nothing. I can't help feeling that speaking up was the right thing to do, even if I could have handled it better. Rachel is my sister, and I can't just stand by and watch her destroy herself trying to support someone who won't even try to help himself. But now I'm the bad guy, and Rachel is more isolated than ever. Update 1. These past 2 weeks have been absolute hell. The silence from Rachel has been deafening, and the situation has spiraled in ways I never could have imagined. I need to write this down while it's fresh, because I still can't believe what happened last night. After 14 days of unanswered calls and texts, I decided I needed to try to fix things, not for Henry's sake, but for Rachel. The last message I got from her was a photo of her and Henry from their wedding day with the text saying how I ruined their perfect life. It broke my heart because I remembered taking that photo, Rachel beaming in her dress, Henry looking at her like she was his whole world. Where did it all go wrong? I got Henry's current address from Mom. Apparently, he and Rachel are taking a break. Her idea, according to Mom, after their latest fight about money. Henry's been staying at his friend Mark's apartment for the past week. Mom made me promise not to go over there, said Henry needed space to process everything, but I couldn't just sit back anymore. I showed up at Mark's place around 7 p.m. yesterday. The apartment complex was run down, with beer cans and cigarette butts littering the walkway. I could hear loud music coming from inside the unit. When I knocked, the music got turned down, and I heard stumbling footsteps. Henry opened the door, and my heart sank. He was a mess, unshaven, wearing a stained t-shirt and reeking of alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot, and he could barely stand straight. Mark was hovering in the background, looking seriously uncomfortable. I kept my voice steady and told Henry I wanted to talk about what happened at the BBQ, try to clear the air. He let me in, laughing this bitter, hollow laugh that made the hair on my neck stand up. The apartment was trashed, empty bottles everywhere, takeout containers piled on every surface, and what looked like gambling slips scattered across the coffee table. Henry stumbled to the couch and started ranting about how I ruined his life. According to his drunken tirade, Rachel wouldn't stop comparing him to me now. He mimicked her voice, saying things like, "Why can't you be more responsible like Alex? Why can't you hold down a job like Alex?" The thing is, I know Rachel would never say those things. She's always been careful not to compare people, knowing how much it hurt her when her mom used to compare her to her stepsisters. The situation escalated quickly. Henry got more agitated as he talked, getting up in my face, jabbing his finger into my chest. I tried to stay calm, kept my hands visible and my voice steady. But when I mentioned Rachel's exhaustion from working double shifts, something in him snapped. He lunged at me, throwing a wild, drunken punch. I managed to dodge, but he caught my shirt and ripped it. Mark had to physically tackle him to the ground to stop him from coming at me again. While Mark was restraining him, Henry kept screaming about how I thought I was better than him, how I never gave him a chance. That's when Mark, still struggling to hold Henry down, started talking. He couldn't keep quiet anymore, he said. The truth needed to come out. Everything Henry had told everyone was a lie. There was no career coach, no job interviews, no networking events. Henry spent his days playing video games until the bars opened, then drank away whatever money he could get his hands on. Mark showed me texts from his phone, messages where Henry bragged about manipulating Rachel. He talked about how she was too afraid of being seen as a failure to ever leave him, how he had her wrapped around his finger. He even joked about taking money from her purse while she slept to fund his drinking and gambling. I was still trying to process this when the door burst open. Rachel stood there, still in her scrubs, face white with shock. She'd been tracking Henry's phone, something she started doing after he disappeared for 3 days last month and cleaned out their joint account. But instead of being horrified by Henry's behavior or the state of the apartment, she turned on me. She started screaming about how I was stalking them, trying to destroy their marriage. She blamed me for pushing Henry to drink, saying he was depressed and I was just making everything worse. When I tried to tell her about Mark's revelations and show her the texts, she wouldn't even look at them. She accused me of manufacturing evidence because I was jealous of their relationship. Henry, who seconds ago had been raging and violent, suddenly switched to looking remorseful. He started crying, telling Rachel he only drank because he felt worthless after what I said at the BBQ. The manipulation was so obvious it made me sick, but Rachel ate it up. She rushed to comfort him, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. I left feeling completely defeated. Rachel followed me to my car, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. She told me to stay away from them both, that I'd done enough damage. She said if I really cared about her, I'd let her handle her marriage without my interference. The worst part came this morning. Mom called to tell me off. Apparently, Rachel told her I showed up drunk at Mark's apartment and tried to get Henry to hit me so I could press charges. It's completely untrue, but Mom believes them. She said I need to stop antagonizing Henry because he's going through a difficult time. I don't know what to do anymore. I have proof that Henry is manipulating my sister, draining her financially and emotionally, but she's so deep in denial she can't see it. Mark wants to help but is scared of losing Henry's friendship. Meanwhile, our parents think I'm the problem. How do you help someone who's so committed to their own destruction? How do you watch your sister disappear into someone you don't even recognize anymore? I don't know what to do anymore. I have proof that Henry is manipulating my stepsister, but she's so deep in denial she can't see it. How do I help someone who doesn't want to be helped? Update 2. Just when I thought this situation couldn't get any more complicated, everything has taken an even darker turn. I've barely slept in the past 3 days, and my hands are still shaking as I type this. It started on Monday morning when Mark called me in a complete panic. Henry had vanished without a trace. He hadn't come back to the apartment for 2 days, which wasn't entirely unusual given his drinking habits, but this time felt different. His phone was going straight to voicemail, and he'd cleared out his belongings from Mark's place. The final red flag was that he'd somehow accessed their shared Xbox account and sold off all their digital games, worth over $800. I immediately tried calling Rachel, putting aside our recent issues because I was genuinely worried about Henry doing something stupid. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. She'd been trying to reach him since Saturday night when he didn't come home for dinner. At first, she thought he was just blowing off steam at a bar, but then she noticed money missing from her wallet, and her credit card was maxed out with charges she didn't recognize. We spent the next 24 hours in a frantic search. Rachel and I drove to every bar, casino, and gaming center Henry frequented. We called hospitals, checked with his other friends, and even reached out to his estranged parents in Ohio. Rachel was oscillating between hysteria and anger, alternating between crying about Henry being hurt somewhere and blaming me for pushing him over the edge with my confrontation last week. The breakthrough came yesterday afternoon when Tom, the owner of the Red Lion pub where Henry was a regular, reached out to me. He had security camera footage from Saturday night showing Henry in the bar, but what we saw on that footage made my stomach turn. Henry wasn't alone. He was with 2 guys Tom recognized as local loan sharks, known for preying on desperate gamblers. The footage showed them leaving together around midnight, with Henry looking nervous but going willingly. Tom pulled me aside and revealed something he'd been keeping quiet about. Henry had been borrowing money from these guys for weeks. Small amounts at first, a couple hundred here and there, always promising to pay them back when he landed a job. But the amounts kept growing, and Henry kept making excuses about why he couldn't pay. Tom said he tried warning Henry about getting involved with these people, but Henry insisted he had a system, that he just needed one good win to turn everything around. Rachel and I went straight to the police station, but their response was frustrating. Since Henry had left willingly, and it hadn't been 48 hours, they couldn't do much beyond taking down our information. The officer barely looked up from his computer as he explained that adults have the right to disappear if they want to. Even when we mentioned the loan sharks, he just said they'd look into it once they could open a missing persons case. While we were sitting in the police station parking lot, trying to figure out our next move, Rachel finally broke down and told me everything she'd been hiding. Henry's financial destruction went far deeper than anyone knew. He had maxed out 3 credit cards in her name, racking up over $15,000 in debt. He'd been sneaking into underground poker games, losing thousands in single nights. The final straw was discovering he'd pawned her grandmother's antique jewelry collection, pieces that had been in her family for generations and were meant to be passed down to her future daughters. She'd been keeping all of this secret out of shame, afraid of anyone finding out how bad things had gotten. She admitted that she'd known about his gambling for months, but convinced herself she could handle it on her own. Every time she confronted him, he'd break down crying, promise to get help, and then go right back to his old habits as soon as she turned her back. Just as we were leaving the station, Rachel got a call from an unknown number. A man with a thick accent demanded $5,000 by midnight, saying they'd start sending her photos of what they'd do to Henry if she didn't pay. Rachel was hysterical, ready to empty her retirement account to get the money. I managed to convince her to let me handle it, recorded the call on my phone, and took it straight back to the police. This time, they took it seriously. Turns out these loan sharks were already on their radar for similar extortion schemes. They set up a sting operation, planning to catch them when they came to collect the money. By evening, they had both the loan sharks and Henry in custody. Here's the kicker. Henry was fine. He hadn't been kidnapped or held against his will. He'd been hiding out at their apartment, helping them run their operation, thinking he could work off his debt by bringing in other desperate gamblers. The loan sharks were arrested for extortion, but Henry was released since he claimed they'd forced him to help them. Rachel is still somehow blaming me for all of this. She keeps saying if I hadn't confronted Henry at the BBQ and then again at Mark's place, none of this would have happened. She says I pushed him to be desperate by damaging his self-esteem. Our parents are finally starting to see the reality of the situation, but they're still insisting I should have handled things differently from the start. I don't know what's worse, watching my sister continue to make excuses for someone who's actively destroying her life, or knowing that Henry is still out there, free to keep manipulating and lying to everyone around him. The loan sharks are in jail, but Henry walked away without consequences, already spinning a story about how he was the real victim in all of this. Update 3. Everything I thought I understood about this situation has been completely upended. Yesterday morning, Sarah, one of Rachel's closest friends from the hospital, showed up at my door unannounced. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. She said she couldn't keep quiet anymore about what she knew, even though Rachel had sworn her to secrecy. Sarah and I sat at my kitchen table for nearly 3 hours while she laid out the truth. According to her, Rachel had been planning her escape from Henry long before the BBQ incident. She'd been meticulously documenting everything, taking photos of unpaid bills, saving screenshots of their bank accounts showing mysterious withdrawals, recording dates and amounts of money that disappeared from her wallet. She even had a folder of texts where Henry admitted to taking money without asking and promised to pay it back. Rachel had been building her case carefully, consulting with a divorce lawyer in secret 2 months before the BBQ. She'd set up a separate bank account at a different bank and had been slowly moving small amounts of money into it, careful not to alert Henry. Sarah showed me text messages from Rachel from 3 months ago, discussing her exit strategy. The Rachel in those texts was clear-headed and determined, nothing like the defensive, angry person she's become. What really got to me was seeing a photo Sarah had taken of a notebook where Rachel had been tracking Henry's lies, pages and pages of documented falsehoods, fake job interviews that never happened, networking events that didn't exist, courses he claimed to be taking but never enrolled in. Sarah said Rachel would fact-check everything, calling companies to verify interview times, checking course registration dates. She was building an airtight case for divorce. The BBQ confrontation actually played right into Rachel's plans. Sarah said Rachel saw it as the perfect catalyst, a public display of Henry's true nature that would help her family understand why she needed to leave. She'd even texted Sarah right after it happened, saying, "This is exactly what I needed. Now everyone can see what I've been dealing with." But something went terribly wrong. 3 days after the BBQ, all of Rachel's evidence disappeared. The folder on her laptop with all the documentation was gone. Her notebook vanished. Even the separate email account she'd been using to communicate with the divorce lawyer was deleted. Henry somehow found everything and destroyed it all. That's when the real manipulation started. Henry convinced Rachel that losing all that documentation was a sign from the universe that they needed to work things out. He turned everything around, making it seem like I was trying to destroy their marriage out of jealousy or spite. He kept telling her that if their marriage failed now, everyone would blame her for listening to me instead of standing by her husband. Sarah showed me texts from that period too, watching Rachel's resolve crumble in real time. It was heartbreaking to see her go from determined and strong to confused and defensive. Henry had managed to gaslight her so completely that she started doubting her own memories. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. Henry is blackmailing Rachel. Sarah wouldn't tell me exactly what he's holding over her head, saying Rachel needs to tell me herself when she's ready. But it's serious enough that Rachel went from being ready to leave to defending Henry at all costs. Sarah thinks that's why Rachel has been pushing everyone away and acting so erratically. I took all of this information to our parents. Mom broke down crying when she saw the texts from those earlier months, finally understanding how much Rachel had been suffering in silence. Dad wanted to go to the police about the blackmail, but we can't do anything without Rachel's cooperation. Sarah thinks Rachel might be reaching her breaking point. After the incident with the loan sharks, she started asking Sarah questions about her old documentation, trying to remember what proof she had. Sarah's been secretly keeping copies of some of their text conversations, just in case Rachel ever needs them. The hardest part is knowing we can't rush this. Rachel has to come to terms with everything in her own time, but watching her continue to live with someone who's actively destroying her while we all stand by helplessly is torture. Sarah's worried about Rachel's mental state, saying she's noticed her making mistakes at work because she's so distracted and stressed. For now, we're all walking on eggshells, trying to keep lines of communication open while looking for ways to help Rachel see the truth. Henry's behavior is getting more erratic. He's been posting cryptic messages on social media about betrayal and revenge. Sarah thinks he knows Rachel is starting to remember everything and he's getting desperate. Update 4. The truth finally exploded this week, and it's both worse and better than anyone imagined. After days of silence, Rachel showed up at my door at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. She looked absolutely exhausted, but more like her old self than I'd seen in months. She was ready to talk. The blackmail that Henry had been holding over her was about an incident at the hospital 2 years ago. A patient had died under Rachel's care during a particularly chaotic night shift. There had been a full investigation, and Rachel was cleared of any wrongdoing. The patient had a previously undiagnosed condition that no one could have caught in time. But Henry had discovered emails between Rachel and another nurse discussing the case, where Rachel questioned if she could have done something differently. The emails themselves were harmless, just a dedicated nurse processing a difficult loss. But Henry had manipulated and edited them, making it look like Rachel had admitted to making a serious mistake in the patient's care. He threatened to send these doctored emails to the hospital board, the patient's family, and the state nursing board if she ever left him. Rachel was terrified of losing her nursing license, her career, and facing potential legal consequences. She spent months paralyzed by this threat, watching Henry drain their accounts and rack up debt, afraid to say anything. The turning point came last week when she caught Henry trying to hack into her work email again, looking for more material to use against her. Something in her snapped. Rachel went straight to her hospital administration and told them everything. She showed them the original emails, explained Henry's blackmail attempt, and laid out all his financial abuse. The hospital's legal team immediately got involved. They're not just supporting Rachel, they're going after Henry for attempted extortion and cybercrimes. The divorce papers were filed yesterday. Rachel's lawyer, recommended by the hospital's legal team, is aggressive and experienced in cases involving financial abuse. They've already frozen all accounts and are documenting every penny Henry stole or gambled away. The restraining order was approved this morning after Rachel showed the judge evidence of Henry's increasingly threatening behavior. Our parents have done a complete turnaround. They helped Rachel move out while Henry was at a bar yesterday. She's staying in their guest house where he can't find her. Dad hired a security company to install cameras and change all the locks. Mom has been going through Rachel's financial records, helping her document everything Henry did for the divorce proceedings. Henry's mask has completely slipped now that he's lost control. He's been posting unhinged rants on social media, accusing Rachel of being the abusive one, claiming she trapped him in the marriage. He tried showing up at her work, but hospital security was ready for him. His own parents finally reached out to Rachel to apologize. Apparently, he's been calling them constantly, getting drunk and ranting about revenge. Mark and Tom have both agreed to testify about Henry's gambling and his involvement with the loan sharks. The police are taking a renewed interest in the case now that they have evidence of the blackmail. Even Henry's old boss from the pharmaceutical company reached out. Turns out Henry wasn't laid off. He was fired for stealing samples to sell on the side. Rachel started therapy yesterday. She says she needs to understand how she let things get so bad, how she went from being strong and independent to someone who lived in fear of her own husband. The Rachel I grew up with is slowly coming back. She's staying focused on her nursing, where she's always excelled. Her colleagues have been incredibly supportive, organizing meal trains and offering to switch shifts so she can meet with her lawyer. As for me and Rachel, we're cautiously rebuilding. She apologized for letting Henry turn her against me, and I apologized for not finding a better way to help her sooner. We're taking it day by day. Yesterday, she even managed to laugh about something for the first time in months. Henry's actions are catching up with him fast. His friends have abandoned him after learning about the blackmail. The loan sharks might be in jail, but their associates have been calling about the money he still owes. His lawyer dropped him after he showed up drunk to their meeting. He's facing potential criminal charges for the blackmail and financial fraud. Sometimes I still can't believe how everything unfolded from a simple family barbecue. But Rachel is free now, and that's what matters. She's got a long road ahead of her, but at least she's not walking it alone anymore.